Right, so Brendan and Kevin are back again with part two of our future state mapping, and so we're going to pick right back up where we left off as it relates to standard work. And so the definition that you see here is really the way that we like to define what we're trying to do with standard work. It's an agreed upon set of work procedures that establish the appropriate and best sequence for each process, and that doing the job by the best current method to meet those customers' demands without any waste. And I think the key thing to see here is both the little sign that our friend is holding there, standard work begins as a baseline that's continuously improved, and also in that second bullet when it refers to it as being the best current method. And the reason that's so important is that standard work is not something that we just do as a part of a project and then leave it alone. Standard work is something that you're always striving to make it better, and that's exactly the way you need to promote it as you're rolling it out to your teams. But it takes a lot of discipline to do that. So you as leaders and you as team members need to really have a process in place to say, we're trying it this way until we identify a better way to do it, and then we're going to switch to that. And by doing that in a really effective manner, it keeps us from just creating a new set of short pans that in 5 years someone else is going to have to come through and try to figure out why we did what we did. That's how we got ourselves in this situation, and the only way out of it is going to be very disciplined in how we roll out our standard work. So some of the characteristics within standard work, in having job rotation where different staff members can perform different tasks or several tasks in order to balance the workload across the team. So instead of thinking of every single work item or work task as being that's the job of Kevin, this is the job of Brendan, identifying which tasks we can be cross-trained on in order to level out the workload across our teams. What could we both do? What could we both share in getting done in order to make the work easier for everybody, ourselves and the rest of the team throughout the day? It says uses a minimum or no job description. So basically just framing the need to separate distinctions between what Kevin does and what I do, trying to minimize that by making everybody empowered and cross-trained to do as much of the work as possible. Incorporating visual management to identify normal versus abnormal. For any of you who've taken the time to watch any of our Lean In Daily Work videos, you'll understand just how deliberate an effort was made in that process to do exactly that third bullet, to make it easy for those teams as they're implementing standard work to be able to detect when there's a problem in the process so that they can bring a group together, think about, get to root cause, and then create that new best standard process to trial. Provides a baseline for continuous improvement that connects to everything I just said on the previous slide. It's just a starting point for the improvement. And that it stabilizes the process, enabling quality in the process step. So that kind of two key components to that one. The first one being the stabilization that it provides. In a work environment where everyone performs a process differently, it makes it very, very, very difficult to really understand and identify a single or a small set of root causes that are the biggest contributors. This is why, as you go through the A3 process, you're going to land on 5, 10, 12, 20 possible root causes. Because oftentimes when we're answering the question why, we're answering it based on the many different ways a process is performed and the root causes that are associated with those methods. The more stabilized and predictable and standard our process is, the more we narrow down that list of possible causes for us to be able to go after. It really does raise the fog, if you will, in our process so we can clearly see what's going on. And then the second piece of that, enabling quality in the process step, by doing a good job of thinking about each step and the quality associated with it, which we'll talk about in a minute, and building that in really helps to dramatically improve those first-time quality measures that we documented as a part of our current states. And this is, again, is just reiterating a point I've made 2 or 3 times now, that keeping in mind that newly created standard work is only in place until that next best standard is developed or determined. So again, let's talk a little bit more about that quality at the source, so that last comment on the slide. So it's very, very important that everybody on the team is rallying behind the importance of quality being built into every single work task that they touch. Every time they touch a patient's chart or electronic medical record or documentation in any way, that they're ensuring both what they received does not contain any errors and that what they're passing along does not contain any errors. And that as they identify errors or problems, they're doing what's necessary to stop and fix them at that point in the process. They're not passing them downstream. And the third bullet there just says samples or established standards are visible tools that can be used for such purposes, having a very deliberate way to make those problems, those errors in quality visual in those processes we go forward. So the quote that goes along with that, or the little saying, is to build that quality in at the source means that you accept no defect, you create no defect, and you pass no defect. It's kind of one of those slogans that it's not surprising to see teams have hanging in their cubicles or hanging in their departments, just as a reminder to everybody of the importance of thinking about quality in the work that they're doing in order to not pass an error downstream. And so this rather confusing looking diagram talks about a lot of different ways you could build error proofing or quality into a process as you go along. So some of the ones that you see along the bottom are whether it be reviews and edits, there's incoming checks to work coming on, there's mistake proofing in the process, there's self-checking upon the work one is doing, there's successive checking by others in the department, there's folks who do zone checking of chunks or bodies or pieces of work before they leave the area. And this is not intended to be framed here to say you have to build every single one of these things before someone can pass something on, but to think about where it makes sense in your process to have these quality checks, because it's so critical an error not be passed along. And then at those critical steps is where we want to be very deliberate and tie something like this in to the process. So it moves us on to step 4. So designing to manage for improving and learning. It's the critical questions here is, how will you use milestones to draw together the organization? How will you manage the process so that work is complete and accurate at those milestones? How will you ensure that learning is captured and used to improve the performance of the value stream? So some of the key concepts and tools: having performance indicators, have progress tracking tools and milestones in order to pace the work, conducting regular checkups and using them to problem solve on the spot, having formal reflection review sessions at key points, and capturing lessons learned and feedback from members for continuous improvement. And the best way I think to frame this for you is just to think about an example that should resonate with most of you. We've all been through an emergency department at one point or another, either ourselves or with a family member. And this is something our emergency department does a great job of. They think about the emergency stay or visit from a patient in relation to milestones. So they think about when a patient arrives until their room, and from when they're roomed to when they see a physician, and from when they see a physician until the point they're discharged, or to the point that we make a determination that they're going to be staying with us, whether in observation or admission status. So they think about from that determination to when they actually depart the emergency department. And then for each of those milestones, just as it talks about in those key lean concepts and tools, they've built indicators and tracking systems, some visual, some not, but all of which are built into regular checkups with improvement teams made up of their key leadership and key team members. Okay? So that way, improvement is not a project to them. Improvement always is continuing to occur, and they do so by visually managing how the work is occurring in those milestones, targeting improvement when they start to see things getting out of control, or they see an area beginning to expand in the amount of lead time that it's taking to do something. They use that to indicate for them that there's a new problem they need to go after, understand why it's occurring. And then while they're doing this, they're capturing what they are learning, and they're sharing it both up and down the value stream. They're sharing it as a part of department meetings. They're sharing it as a part of health system-wide quality week celebrations that we do. They're finding any method as possible to transfer that knowledge to others so others can understand why delays are occurring in the emergency department. So that's just one example, but it really, I think, ties all these different points together. They've done some of those better than others, but they've made a very deliberate effort. They didn't start by measuring those milestones. That's all been within the last 5 or 6 years. Prior to that, they didn't measure any of that. And it was through this work and that reflection that they identified why it's so important to make sure that was built into their future state as a part of their early lean work, and it's continued on to this day. So then step 5, estimating your results. And so as you've gone through the process of reflecting on your current state, building in that flow, identifying your quality improvement measures or quality improvement techniques that you're trying to build in, your quality at the source, identifying your milestones, your checkpoints, how you're going to do status checks, how you're going to transfer your learning. We want you to take a step back, reflect on your new process you've drawn, and come up with a best possible estimate for what you think the impact will be. If you've eliminated steps, combined steps, reduced handoffs, improved the quality, do your best to come up with an estimate of what you think that impact would be, and then reflect on how close is that going to be to the targets that you set. Remember that you could go through that estimate process and come up short of your goal, and that's okay, because this really is one PDCA cycle, one improvement cycle that you're attempting to put in place to improve the delivery of those customer requirements to your patients, to your families, and to your internal suppliers or downstream customers within the health system. So you want to use these estimates to give you a sense of what you think the expected results might be, or impact might be. And then also reflect on what you think the changes in your resource requirements might be. So in this case, are you going to need more staff? Are you going to need less staff in an area but more staff in a different area? Are you going to need less desk office space? Really just reflecting on any less supplies or more supplies of a given type based on your new process. Really defining what you think the impact on resources will be so that you're prepared for that experiment when you try it. The worst thing to do would be to draw up a process, get it going, and then realize you didn't prepare or have enough of blank supply on hand to support it. So think about all the resources you're going to need in order to make that experiment successful. So this just ties it all together then in a series of steps that you can use, print off, and take to your teams as you think about each of these components. And just as a quick high-level flyby on this, we'll say just remembering number one being defining those requirements if you haven't done it already, your customers' requirements, making sure you understand that scope of change, radical, complete redesign, or incremental step design, making sure that you're building in flow into that work, you're improving the quality and reliability of the process through standardized work, you're designing and managing those milestones for the improvement and for the sharing and the learning of the organization, and that you've gone through a deliberate step of estimating your results and planning for how you're going to measure them. And when you've done that, you've successfully created your future state map, you're ready to try it, and you're ready to learn from the changes that you've made. This starburst here is just as a nice little tip and trick that we found is as you're going along and answering these questions with your team is to make sure that you're being very deliberate in documenting all the agreed upon changes and interventions that you've identified. Even if some of them relate to something else you're trying to change, make sure you have everything documented that you're looking to put in place so that you can circle back to that list as a part of the next module, which is creating your implementation plan. These next couple slides just sort of reiterate and pick up from where we left off before. So talking about different icons you can use. There's quite a few less that we use in our future state maps. We use the Kaizen burst you see a lot. And then depending on the particular lean tool we're using, we like to make sure we denote that somewhere on our maps. And then as it relates to our example around the blood culture draws, I'm not going to go through every step you see here, but they went the route of taking their current state map, laying it out in a way that represents the combination or the combining of steps that they did, and then documenting not just their Kaizen bursts for their interventions they're doing, but also what they think those interventions are going to be eliminating. So in other words, they're putting this change in place, and they expect what to happen from it. So action and outcome. And that's really what they tried to do, actions at the top, and then what they thought the outcomes would be along the bottom. So that's a really nice way of developing a future state, and you can do that and apply it to your processes as well. So that's where we're going to leave you with. If you have any questions, as Kevin and I said, please be sure to reach out to us. Our contact information is available, and we'll be happy to help you out. Thank you very much.
And I'll just add one thing. So great job, Brendan. Just keep in mind that as you've developed your root cause analysis, you're going to be landing on some very specific actionable root causes that your team will be putting in place. So your future state is going to want to include what your process will look like after you've addressed those or those root causes at that actionable level. And then the things that Brendan walked us through today really get at more of the standard things that every future state map could utilize and improve. Just in generic terms, they're all very good ways to get to a better future state. But you'll have very specific things that are focused around you addressing your specific root causes that you identified. So with that, thank you so much, and we look forward to talking to you.